The needles clicked together in a rhythm that had become as familiar to Violet Hayes as her own heartbeat, the wool sliding through her fingers with practiced ease as she sat on the weathered bench outside the general store in Hot Springs, New Mexico territory, her basket of completed socks beside her waiting for anyone who might need them. It was the spring of 1882, and Violet had been sitting on that same bench every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for the past 3 months, since she had arrived in town with nothing but a carpet bag and a determination to start over. The high desert air was warm but not uncomfortable, the mountains rising in the distance like silent guardians over the small settlement that had grown around the natural hot springs that gave the town its name. She had found work at the boarding house, cleaning rooms and helping Mrs. Patterson with the laundry, but her true passion showed itself in the click of her knitting needles and the growing pile of socks she made for anyone who needed them. The townspeople had grown accustomed to her presence. This quiet young woman of 22 with honey-colored hair she kept pinned back in a simple bun and eyes the color of sage after a rain. She never asked for payment, though some folks insisted on leaving a coin or two in her basket, or bringing her yarn and wool when they could spare it. She knitted socks for the ranch hands whose feet ached after long days in the saddle, for the miners whose boots wore through everything else too quickly, for the children at the schoolhouse whose families could not afford store-bought stockings. She knitted because it gave her purpose, because it connected her to people without requiring the words that sometimes felt too heavy on her tongue, because it was something good in a world that had shown her plenty of hardness. Violet did not notice the man watching her at first. She was focused on turning the heel of the sock she was working on, counting her stitches carefully, her lips moving silently with the numbers. But when she finally glanced up to rest her eyes, she saw him standing near the hitching post, one hand on the neck of a large bay horse, his gaze fixed directly on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was unlike any man she had seen in Hot Springs before. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun behind him. His arms were thick with muscle visible even through the worn fabric of his shirt, and his chest was deep and powerful. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, some of it pulled back roughly from his face, and a beard covered his jaw, well kept but untamed. His skin was weathered and tanned from years under the open sky, and his eyes were a startling blue that seemed almost unnatural against his sun-darkened face. He wore buckskin pants and tall boots, a knife at his belt and a rifle on his saddle, and there was something about him that spoke of mountains and wilderness and spaces far from civilization. Violet looked away quickly, her cheeks warming, and focused determinedly on her knitting. She had not come to Hot Springs looking for male attention. She had come here to escape it, to build a life on her own terms after leaving behind a situation in Kansas that had nearly broken her spirit. But even as she worked her needles through the wool, she could feel his gaze on her, steady and unwavering. She did not look up again until she heard the sound of boots on the wooden walkway, heavy and deliberate. The man stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to see his face. Up close, he was even more imposing, all hard muscle and contained strength, but there was something in his eyes that was not threatening. Curiosity, perhaps, or loneliness. "Madam," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere in his chest. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture of respect that seemed almost incongruous coming from someone who looked like he belonged in the untamed wilderness rather than polite society. "Sir," Violet replied quietly, her hands stilling on her knitting. "I have been watching you," he said bluntly, and Violet's heart began to beat faster. But then he continued, "You make socks for folks, good ones from the look of them. Yes, she said, relaxing slightly. Anyone who needs them. You give them away, mostly. Some people insist on paying, but I do not require it. He was silent for a long moment, studying her face with those piercing blue eyes. Then he said, My name is Owen Rutherford. I trap and hunt in the mountains north of here. Come into town maybe 4 times a year for supplies. Violet waited, unsure what he wanted her to say. My socks, Owen continued. They are in terrible shape, full of holes, uncomfortable in my boots, makes for miserable walking when you are tracking through rough country. I would be happy to make you a pair, Violet said immediately, already mentally calculating how much wool she had left and what weight would be best for someone who spent his time in the mountains. Do you have a preference for the thickness? And what size do you need? Owen looked down at his feet, then back at her. Size 12, thick as you can make them. Mountain nights get cold even in summer. It will take me perhaps a week, Violet said, maybe a bit less if I have time in the evenings. I can wait, Owen said. Then, after a pause, I can pay. I have money. That is not necessary, Violet began, but Owen shook his head. You do work, you deserve payment. I will not take charity. There was pride in his voice, fierce and unbending, and Violet understood it. She herself had struggled with accepting help from others when she first arrived in Hot Springs, still raw from everything she had left behind. Very well, she said. Whatever you think is fair. Owen nodded, then stood there for another moment as if he wanted to say something else. Finally, he touched his hat again and said, I will be staying at the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson's place. I work there, Violet said, surprised. Something that might have been satisfaction crossed Owen's face. Then I will see you there, Miss Hayes, Violet Hayes. Miss Hayes, he repeated, as if testing the name. Then he turned and walked back to his horse, moving with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in his own body despite his size. He swung into the saddle with fluid strength and rode off down the street toward Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, leaving Violet staring after him with her knitting forgotten in her lap. She sat there for several minutes after he disappeared, trying to understand the strange flutter in her chest. It was just a commission for socks, she told herself. Just another person who needed something she could provide. But she knew, even as she thought it, that she was lying to herself. There had been something in the way Owen Rutherford looked at her, something in the careful politeness of his words, that suggested he had not really been asking about socks at all. That evening, when Violet returned to the boarding house after her hours at the general store bench, she found Owen sitting in the front parlor with Mrs. Patterson, a cup of coffee in his large hands, listening politely as the older woman chattered about the latest town news. Mrs. Patterson was a widow of 60 with iron gray hair and a tendency to talk enough for 3 people, but she had a good heart and had given Violet both work and a room when she had arrived in Hot Springs with almost nothing. "Oh, Violet, dear," Mrs. Patterson called when she saw her in the doorway. "You have met Mr. Rutherford. He tells me you are making him socks. Such a kind girl, always helping people. Did you know, Mr. Rutherford, that Violet made socks for every child at the schoolhouse this winter? The teacher said it was a blessing, what with how cold it got in January." Violet felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. "It was nothing, Mrs. Patterson. I was happy to do it." "Nonsense, it was something indeed. You have a gift, child." Mrs. Patterson turned back to Owen. "And where did you say you trap, Mr. Rutherford? Up in the Black Range?" "Yes, madam." "North and west of here, up in the high country. Lonely work, I imagine." "It suits me," Owen said simply. "Well, you are welcome here as long as you need. Violet, be a dear and check that I put enough blankets in the room at the end of the hall. Mr. Rutherford will be staying for a week or 2. "A week or 2, Violet repeated, surprised. Owen had said he only came to town 4 times a year, and she had assumed he would leave as soon as he had his supplies. Owen met her gaze over the rim of his coffee cup. "I have business that will take some time, and I am waiting for those socks." "But I said they would only take a week at most," Violet protested. "Then perhaps I will need more than one pair," Owen said calmly. "Mountain life is hard on clothing." Mrs. Patterson beamed. "Excellent. Violet makes the finest socks in the territory, I am certain. Now, Violet, go check that room and then you can start on supper. I bought a lovely roast from the butcher this morning." Violet escaped up the stairs, her mind whirling. Why would Owen Rutherford extend his stay in town just for socks? She could have mailed them to him, or held them for his next visit. It did not make sense, unless he was telling the truth and he really did have other business in Hot Springs. But something in her intuition told her that the socks were an excuse, a reason to stay that had little to do with keeping his feet warm. The room at the end of the hall was one of the larger ones, with a proper bed instead of a narrow cot and a window that looked out over the street. Violet checked the blankets, found them sufficient, and was about to leave when she noticed that Owen's belongings were already there. His saddlebags lay on the chair, and a heavy coat hung on the hook by the door. She should not have looked, should have just left immediately, but curiosity got the better of her. The coat was made of thick bearskin, expertly tanned and sewn, warm enough for the coldest mountain winter. It was the coat of a man who lived in harsh conditions and knew how to survive them. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" Violet spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Owen stood in the doorway, filling it completely with his broad frame. She had not heard him come up the stairs, and the silence of his movement was startling for someone so large. "Yes," she managed. "Everything is fine. I was just checking the blankets." Owen stepped into the room, and suddenly the space felt much smaller. "Mrs. Patterson said you live here too. You have a room on this floor, the next floor up," Violet said. "In the attic space. It is small but comfortable." "Good. A woman should have a safe place to sleep." There was something protective in the way he said it, as if he personally wanted to ensure her safety. Violet found it both touching and slightly overwhelming. "I should go help with supper," she said, moving toward the door. Owen stepped aside to let her pass, but as she went by him he said quietly, "Miss Hayes, thank you for agreeing to make the socks." "You are welcome, Mr. Rutherford," Violet replied and fled down the stairs before he could see the color in her cheeks. Over the next few days, Violet saw Owen frequently. He was at breakfast every morning, eating with an appetite that suggested he was not accustomed to regular meals. He was polite to Mrs. Patterson and the other two boarders, an elderly man named Mr. Chen who ran the laundry and a young clerk from the land office named Timothy. But his attention, Violet could not help but notice, always seemed to gravitate toward her. He asked her questions while she served the meals. Where had she come from? Kansas, she said, though she did not elaborate. How long had she been knitting? Since she was a child, taught by her grandmother. Did she like Hot Springs? Yes, very much. It was peaceful here and the people were kind. He told her about his life in return, though she had not asked. He had come west from Missouri 15 years ago when he was just 18, looking for something he could not quite name. He had tried mining, ranching, and hunting before settling into trapping. He had a cabin up in the mountains, built with his own hands, and he spent most of the year alone except for the occasional visit from other trappers or the Apache who sometimes passed through the high country. "You not get lonely?" Violet asked one evening as she cleared the supper dishes. The other boarders had already left the table and Mrs. Patterson was in the kitchen. Owen considered the question. "I used to think I preferred it, being alone, no one to answer to, no one to disappoint. And now," he looked at her with those intense blue eyes, "now I am not so sure." Violet felt her pulse quicken. She picked up the plates hastily. "I should help Mrs. Patterson with the washing." "Violet," Owen said, and it was the first time he had used her given name without the formality of Miss Hayes. The sound of it in his deep voice made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Would you sit with me for a moment? I have chores," she protested weakly. 5 minutes. Against her better judgment, Violet sat. Owen leaned forward, his forearms on the table, his hands clasped together. They were large hands, scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard for everything he had. "I need to tell you something," Owen said. "I am not very good with words. I spend most of my time talking to my horse in the wilderness, but I do not want you to think I am dishonest." "I do not think that," Violet said, confused. "I did not come to Hot Springs for supplies," Owen said bluntly. "I mean, I do need supplies, but that is not why I came this particular month. I came because I heard about you." Violet stared at him. "You heard about me?" "From the winter camp where the trappers gather. 3 months ago. A man named Joshua was passing through from Hot Springs, and he mentioned a young woman who knitted socks for anyone who needed them. He said she sat outside the general store every week like clockwork, never asking for anything in return, just making things to help people. He said she was kind." "I do not understand," Violet said slowly. Owen drew in a breath. "I have been alone a long time, Violet, by choice. I did not think I wanted anything else. But when Joshua told that story, something in it stuck with me. I could not stop thinking about it. About a woman who would spend her time making things for strangers. About what kind of person does that?" "Many people are generous," Violet said, though her heart was beating fast. "Not like that. Not without expectation. I started thinking maybe I wanted to meet someone like that. Maybe I was tired of being alone, so I came to town early. Told myself I would just look, just see if the story was true. And then I saw you sitting there with your knitting needles and your basket of socks, and you were—" He paused, searching for words. "You were exactly what I had been imagining, so I made up that excuse about needing socks." Violet should have felt manipulated. Should have been angry that he had approached her under false pretenses. But instead, she felt something entirely different. "You already had good socks," she said quietly. "Yes, I made them myself last winter. They are adequate. You wasted your time coming here." "No," Owen said firmly. "I did not. Meeting you was not a waste of time." Violet stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Mr. Rutherford, Owen, I do not know what you are hoping for, but I am not looking for a husband or a sweetheart or anything of that nature. I came to Hot Springs to be independent. To have my own life." Owen stood as well, though he did not move toward her. "I understand, and I am not asking you for anything. I just wanted to be honest about why I am here. You said you were staying for a week or two. Were you planning to spend that whole time trying to court me?" "I was planning to spend it getting to know you," Owen corrected. "If you allowed it. As a friend, if that is all you want." "I do not need friends who lie to me," Violet said, but there was no real heat in her voice. "I did not lie. I do need socks. Mine are adequate but not wonderful. And I would like you to make me some. I will pay you fairly for them." Despite herself, Violet felt a small smile tugging at her lips. "You are very stubborn, Mr. Rutherford. I live in the mountains alone for months at a time. Stubborn is a requirement. I am still angry with you." "I understand. But I will still make you the socks, because I said I would and I keep my word." "I would expect nothing less," Owen said seriously. Violet shook her head and went to the kitchen, leaving Owen standing by the table. But as she helped Mrs. Patterson wash the dishes, she found herself thinking about what he had said. He had come all this way, changed his schedule just because he heard about her knitting socks. It was absurd. It was presumptuous. And yet, there was something deeply touching about it too. He could have approached her with smooth lies and false charm, but instead he had been honest, even though that honesty might cost him any chance with her. That night, as Violet worked on his socks in her small attic room, she found herself wondering about Owen Rutherford. What kind of man spent 15 years in the wilderness? What was he running from or looking for? And why had a simple story about knitting socks been the thing to draw him out of his solitude? The next morning at breakfast, Owen was quiet, letting Mrs. Patterson carry the conversation. But when Violet set his plate in front of him, he looked up at her and said softly, "Thank you." "For the breakfast?" she asked. "For not refusing to see me." Violet did not know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and moved on to serve Mr. Chen. Over the following days, a strange routine developed. Owen did not press Violet for time or attention, but he was always there, a steady presence. He helped Mrs. Patterson fix a loose board on the front porch. He carried water for Mr. Chen when the elderly man's back was bothering him. He walked with Violet to the general store when she went to sit with her knitting, not hovering but staying close enough that she knew he was there. People in town began to notice. The shopkeeper, Mr. Daniels, raised an eyebrow when he saw Owen standing near Violet's bench. The banker's wife, Mrs. Thompson, stopped to chat with Violet one afternoon and made pointed comments about what a fine-looking man that mountain trapper was. Even the priest, Father Miguel, mentioned in passing that it was good to see young people spending time together in a proper, respectable manner. Violet tried to ignore the attention, but it was difficult. She had lived quietly in Hot Springs for 3 months, attracting no particular notice except for her knitting. Now, suddenly, people were looking at her differently, speculating about her and Owen. It made her uncomfortable, but at the same time, she could not deny that something was growing between them. Owen talked to her while she knitted, his voice low and steady. He told her about the mountains, painting pictures with his words of pine forests and clear streams, of elk moving through morning mist and stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. He described his cabin, small but solid, with a stone fireplace and windows that looked out over a valley. He spoke of the harsh winters and the spring thaws, the constant work of survival, the satisfaction of living by his own skills and strength. And Violet found herself talking in return, though she had not meant to. She told him about growing up in Kansas, about her grandmother who had taught her to knit, about the books she loved to read. She told him, haltingly, about why she had left Kansas, though she did not go into all the details. There had been a man, she said, someone her father had wanted her to marry. Someone who had seemed kind at first but who had shown a different face in private. She had broken off the engagement, but the man had not accepted it. He had become possessive, frightening. So she had left, taken what little money she had saved and come west to New Mexico territory where he could not follow. Owen listened without interrupting, his jaw tight. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "If he ever comes here, I will make sure he leaves and does not come back." The fierce protectiveness in his voice should have alarmed her. Instead, Violet felt safe in a way she had not felt in a long time. "He will not come," she said quietly. "He does not know where I went. And it has been months now. He has likely forgotten about me." "No man could forget about you," Owen said with absolute certainty. Violet's fingers stumbled over her knitting, and she had to stop to fix a dropped stitch. When she looked up, Owen was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Want, yes, but also tenderness and something deeper that made her breath catch. "Owen," she said carefully, "what do you want from me?" "Everything," he said simply. "But I will take whatever you are willing to give." "I do not know if I can give you anything. I came here to be alone." "Then I will be alone with you," Owen said, "if you will let me." It was perhaps the strangest declaration Violet had ever heard, but also the most honest. She looked at this man, this mountain of muscle and quiet strength, and she realized that somewhere in the past week he had become important to her. She thought about him when he was not there. She looked forward to their conversations. She felt safer with him near, not because she was afraid, but because his presence was solid and reassuring in a world that had too often been uncertain. "The socks are almost finished," she said, changing the subject because she was not ready to answer his question. "I will have them done tomorrow." "Then I will need to commission another pair," Owen said calmly. "You cannot keep ordering socks forever." "Why not? I told you mountain life is hard on them." Violet shook her head, but she was smiling. "You are impossible." "I am determined," Owen corrected. "There is a difference." The next day, Violet finished the socks. They were perhaps the finest pair she had ever made, thick and warm and soft, with a careful attention to detail that spoke of how much she had been thinking about the person who would wear them. She wrapped them in brown paper and tied them with string, and that evening after supper, she gave them to Owen in the front parlor. He unwrapped them slowly, examining every stitch with the focus of someone who appreciated good craftsmanship. Then he looked up at her with an expression that made her heart turn over. "These are beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you." "You are welcome," Violet replied. "You can pay me whatever you think is fair." Owen reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it, he counted out 10 silver dollars, far more than anyone else had ever paid her. Violet started to protest, but Owen said, "This is what they are worth. Do not argue with me." Violet took the money, knowing that to refuse would insult him. "Will you be leaving now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "You want me to leave?" The honest answer was no, but Violet was not sure she was ready to say it out loud. "I want you to do what is best for you." "Then I am staying," Owen said, "because what is best for me is being near you, Mrs. Patterson," who had been pretending not to listen from her chair by the fire, made a small, pleased sound. Violet shot her a look, but the older woman just smiled innocently and went back to her mending. "You cannot stay here indefinitely," Violet said to Owen. "You have your traps to check, your cabin to maintain. You said yourself you only come to town a few times a year. The traps will keep, and I built the cabin to last. It will be there when I get back." "Owen," Violet said helplessly. He stood and crossed to her, moving with that surprising grace despite his size. He did not touch her, but he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to see his face. "Violet, I know you are afraid. I know you came here to be independent, to escape something that hurt you. I am not asking you to give up that independence. I am not asking you to make any decisions right now. I am only asking you to let me stay. Let me keep getting to know you. And if, after a while, you decide you do not want me here, I will go back to my mountains and I will not bother you again. But please, give me a chance." Violet looked into those intense blue eyes and felt something inside her shift, like ice breaking up in a spring thaw. She had been so determined to protect herself, to never trust a man again, to build a life that depended on no one but herself. But Owen was not asking her to give up that life. He was asking to be part of it on her terms, at her pace. "All right," she said quietly. "You can stay." The smile that spread across Owen's face transformed him. He looked younger, more open, and Violet realized that he smiled so rarely that each one was precious. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. Over the next week, Violet found herself spending more and more time with Owen. He accompanied her to the general store. Each day she knitted, sitting nearby and whittling small figures from pieces of wood he pulled from his pockets. He made her a bird, then a deer, then a tiny bear so detailed she could see the texture of its fur. She watched his large hands work with surprising delicacy, the knife moving with precision, and she understood that this was how he spent his evenings in the cabin, creating beauty out of loneliness. They walked together in the evenings, following the paths that led out of town toward the hot springs the settlement was named for. The springs bubbled up from the earth in natural pools, steam rising into the cooling air. Owen told her that the Apache considered them sacred, a place of healing, and that he had learned to respect their traditions during his time in the mountains. "You speak their language?" Violet asked, impressed. "Some. Enough to trade and to show I mean no harm. They have been generous in teaching me which plants are safe to eat, which tracks belong to which animals. I owe them a great deal of my survival." "That is not the way most white men talk about them," Violet observed. "Most white men are fools," Owen said bluntly. "The Apache have lived in these mountains for centuries. They know things we could never learn on our own. Seems stupid to ignore that knowledge because of pride." Violet found herself liking him more with every conversation. Owen had none of the arrogance she had come to associate with men, none of the need to prove himself or dominate others. He was confident in a quiet way, secure in his skills and his place in the world, and he treated everyone he met with the same calm respect, whether they were the banker or the Mexican laborer who worked at the livery stable. But it was not just his character that drew her. There was something about his physical presence that she could not ignore. The way his muscles moved under his shirt when he worked, the strength in his hands, the breadth of his shoulders. She found herself watching him when she thought he was not paying attention, admiring the sheer power of him, the masculine beauty of a body built through hard work and harsh living, and she knew he watched her too. She could feel his gaze on her as she knitted, following the movement of her fingers lingering on her face. There was hunger in the way he looked at her, but also restraint. He never pushed, never pressed. He was waiting for her to come to him. One afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after Owen had first arrived in Hot Springs, Violet was sitting on her bench outside the general store when a stranger rode up. He was a cowboy from one of the ranches north of town, dusty from the trail, and he swung down from his horse with easy familiarity. "Afternoon, miss," he said, tipping his hat. "Name is Cole. I heard you make socks for folks." "I do," Violet said, smiling up at him. "Do you need a pair? My little brother does. He is 10 and his feet are growing faster than Ma can keep up with. Thought I would see if you could help." "Of course," Violet said immediately. "If you can tell me his size, I can have them ready in a few days." Cole grinned. "You are a lifesaver, miss. Ma has been worrying about it." He paused, then added, "You are as pretty as they say, too, if you do not mind me saying." It was a harmless compliment, delivered with cowboy charm, but Violet saw Owen stiffen from where he sat nearby. He stood slowly, all 6 feet and more of him unfolding, his broad shoulders squared, and walked over to stand beside Violet. He did not say anything, just looked at Cole with those piercing blue eyes, and the cowboy took a step back. "Didn't mean any disrespect," Cole said quickly, his hand moving away from where it had been resting on his pistol. "Just paying a compliment." "No harm done," Owen said, his voice level but carrying an unmistakable warning. "Miss Hayes is under my protection." "Understood," Cole said. He turned back to Violet. I will come back in a few days for those socks if that is all right." "That will be fine," Violet said, giving him what she hoped was a reassuring smile. She did not want Owen's protectiveness to scare away the people she was trying to help. Cole hurried back to his horse and rode off, and Violet turned to Owen with her hands on her hips. That was unnecessary. He was just being friendly. "He was looking at you the way men look at women they want," Owen said flatly. "And what way do you look at me?" Violet challenged. "The same way," Owen admitted. "But I have your permission to be here." He did not. Violet wanted to be annoyed, but she could not deny the small thrill that went through her at Owen's possessiveness. "I can take care of myself," she said, but her voice was softer. "I know you can," Owen said, "but you should not have to, not when I am here." That evening, Violet found herself thinking about what Owen had said. She had spent 3 months priding herself on her independence, on her ability to manage without relying on anyone. But there was something seductive about the idea of being protected, of having someone strong enough to stand between her and the world when she needed it. Not because she was weak, but because he cared enough to want to. She was still thinking about it when she went down to the kitchen to help Mrs. Patterson prepare supper. The older woman was rolling out dough for biscuits, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "That Mr. Rutherford is quite taken with you," Mrs. Patterson said without preamble. Violet felt her cheeks heat. "He is a kind man." "He is more than kind, dear. He is in love with you. Anyone with eyes can see it." "We barely know each other," Violet protested. "Some people know in an instant, others take years. There is no right way." Mrs. Patterson dusted flour from her hands. "The question is, how do you feel about him?" Violet was silent for a long moment, considering. "I think," she said slowly, "I think I am beginning to feel the same way, but it frightens me." "Love is frightening," Mrs. Patterson said matter-of-factly. "You are giving someone the power to hurt you. But it is also the most wonderful thing in the world when it is right. And that man, he is right for you. I have lived long enough to recognize it." "How can you be sure?" "The way he looks at you. The way he listens when you speak. The way he helps around the house without being asked, because he knows it makes your life easier. The way he is patient even though I can see how badly he wants to court you properly." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "He is a good man, Violet. A strong man, but a gentle one too. They are rare." That night, Violet could not sleep. She lay in her small bed in the attic room, listening to the sounds of the house settling, and thought about Owen Rutherford, about his quiet strength and his honest eyes, about the way he made her feel safe and seen and valued, about the future she could have with him, if she was brave enough to reach for it. The problem was that she was not sure she was brave enough. The last man she had trusted had turned cruel, and even though she knew intellectually that Owen was nothing like him, the fear still lived in her bones. What if she opened her heart and he changed? What if the kindness was an act, and once he had her, he became someone different? But even as she thought it, she knew it was not true. Owen had been nothing but honest with her from the moment he admitted why he had really come to Hot Springs. He had shown her patience and respect, and a willingness to wait for however long she needed. Those were not the actions of a man who planned to hurt her. The next morning, Violet made a decision. After breakfast, when the other boarders had left and Mrs. Patterson was upstairs making beds, she found Owen in the parlor reading a newspaper that was 3 weeks old. "Owen," she said, and he looked up immediately, giving her his full attention. "Would you like to go for a walk with me? Somewhere away from town?" Something lit in his eyes. "I would like that very much." They walked out past the hot springs, following a trail that led up into the foothills. The morning was clear and bright, the sky that impossible blue that seemed unique to New Mexico territory. Birds called from the piñon pines, and the air smelled of sage and earth and growing things. Owen walked beside her, matching his stride to hers, occasionally offering his hand when the path grew rough. His palm was warm and calloused when she took it, his grip strong but careful, and Violet felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the sun. When they reached a flat outcropping of rock with a view of the valley below, Violet stopped. Hot Springs looked small from up here, just a collection of buildings clustered around the springs, surrounded by vast stretches of empty land rolling toward distant mountains. "It is beautiful," Violet said softly. "Yes," Owen agreed, but when she glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the view. "Owen," Violet said, gathering her courage, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Always," he said seriously, "if I let myself care for you. If I let this become what I think we both want it to be. Will you stay? I know you love the mountains, your cabin, your solitary life. I do not want to wake up one day and find you gone because you missed it too much." Owen was quiet for a long moment, and Violet's heart sank. But then he said, "Can I show you something?" He led her off the trail, through a stand of pinyon and juniper, and then out onto another outcropping. From this angle they could see farther north, toward the mountains where he trapped. "I have lived up there for 15 years, Owen said, pointing toward the distant peaks. "It was good for a long time. I needed the solitude, the simplicity. But in the last few years, it has started to feel less like peace and more like emptiness. I would sit in my cabin in the evenings, carving wood by firelight, and I would think about what I was missing. Connection, partnership, love." He turned to face her fully. "I did not know what to do about it. I did not know how to find what I was looking for. And then Joshua told that story about you, and it was like a light had been lit. I realized I had been waiting for someone like you. Someone kind and strong and independent. Someone who did not need me but might want me anyway." Owen reached out and gently cupped Violet's face in his large hand. "If you let me stay, I will not leave. I will sell my trapping grounds to another mountain man. I will find work here in town or on a ranch. I will build you a house if you want one, or we can stay at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house if that makes you happy. Whatever you need, wherever you want to be, that is where I will be too, because the mountains are beautiful but they are not you." Violet felt tears prick her eyes. "You would give up everything you have built." "It is not giving up," Owen said. "It is choosing something better." "What if I disappoint you? What if I am not who you think I am?" "You could never disappoint me," Owen said with absolute certainty. "But if you are worried, then let me prove it to you. Let me court you properly. Let me show you every day that I am serious about this." Violet took a shaky breath. This was the moment. The choice. She could step back, protect herself, stay safe and alone, or she could step forward, take the risk, and reach for the happiness that was being offered. She thought about Owen's patience, his honesty, the way he had respected every boundary she set, the way he looked at her like she was something precious, and she thought about the future she wanted, not the one shaped by fear, but the one shaped by hope. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes, you can court me." The smile that broke across Owen's face was like sunrise. He pulled her into his arms, and Violet went willingly, tucking her head against his chest. He was so large and solid and warm, and she felt surrounded by his strength in the best possible way. His heart beat steady under her ear, and his arms around her were both gentle and unbreakable. "Thank you," he said roughly. "I will make you happy, Violet. I swear it." "I know," Violet said, and realized that she meant it. They stood there for a long time, holding each other on the mountainside above hot springs, and Violet felt something inside her finally begin to heal. She had come west running from pain, determined to never trust a man again. But Owen had shown her that not all men were the same, that strength and gentleness could coexist, that love did not have to mean losing herself. When they finally walked back to town, Owen held her hand the entire way, and Violet did not pull away. Word spread quickly in Hot Springs that the mountain man and the sock knitting woman were courting. Mrs. Patterson was delighted, and made no effort to hide it, telling everyone who came to the boarding house about what a fine couple they made. The townspeople, who had grown fond of Violet over the months she had lived among them, were cautiously approving. Owen was an outsider, but he was respectful and hardworking, and it was clear that he cared deeply for Violet. Over the following weeks, Owen courted Violet with a thoroughness that both touched and amused her. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers picked from the hillsides, a book he had borrowed from the priest's small library, a shawl he had bought from the trading post. He sat with her every day while she knitted, never complaining about the hours she spent on her bench outside the general store. He walked her home in the evenings and said good night with a chaste kiss on her forehead that left her wanting more. He also made good on his word to stay. He sold his trapping grounds and equipment to another mountain man who was expanding his territory, keeping only his horse and personal belongings. He took a job at the livery stable, where his strength and knowledge of horses made him immediately valuable. He moved out of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house into a small room above the stable, though he still took his meals at the boarding house so he could see Violet every day. And slowly, carefully, they built a life together. Owen met Violet's friends, the few she had made in town. She introduced him to the school teacher, Miss Porter, who commissioned socks for all her students. She took him to meet Father Miguel, who talked with Owen about the spiritual life of a man who spent so much time in solitude. Owen was quiet but thoughtful in his answers, and the priest seemed satisfied that he was a man of good character. Violet, in turn, learned more about Owen. She learned that he was educated, having attended school back in Missouri until he was 16. She learned that he had left home after his parents died in a typhoid outbreak, unable to bear staying in a place that held so many memories. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged slowly, surprising her into laughter. She learned that he was patient with animals and children, firm but kind. And she learned that when he loved completely, holding nothing back. It was this last quality that finally dissolved the last of Violet's fear. Owen did not play games or hide his feelings. When he looked at her, she saw everything in his eyes: desire, tenderness, devotion. It was overwhelming and intoxicating and utterly sincere. One evening in late June, nearly 2 months after Owen had first arrived in Hot Springs, they were walking back from the hot springs at sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, and the air was warm but not uncomfortable. Owen had been quieter than usual all day, and Violet kept glancing at him, trying to understand what was on his mind. Finally, as they reached the edge of town, Owen stopped and turned to face her. "Violet, I need to ask you something." "All right," Violet said, her heart beginning to beat faster. Owen took both of her hands in his, dwarfing them completely. "I know we have only been courting for 6 weeks. I know that is not very long by conventional standards, but I have known since the moment I saw you that you were what I had been looking for, and every day since then has only confirmed it." He took a breath. "I want to marry you, Violet. I want to build a life with you, here in Hot Springs or wherever you want to be. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to work hard to provide for you and any children we might have. I want to be your partner and your protector and your best friend. Will you marry me?" Violet felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you." Owen pulled her into his arms and kissed her, really kissed her, for the first time. His lips were warm and firm, and the kiss was both gentle and passionate, filled with all the feeling he had been holding back during their courtship. Violet wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, losing herself in the sensation, in the rightness of it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy," he promised, "every day for the rest of our lives." "I know," Violet said, and she did. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the Catholic Church, with Father Miguel officiating and what seemed like half the town in attendance. Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire service, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Mr. Chen gave them a set of fine linens he had brought from San Francisco. The schoolteacher and her students sang a hymn, and when Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, and Owen kissed his bride, there was not a dry eye in the church. Owen had found them a small house on the edge of town, just a few rooms but solid and well built, with a little yard where Violet could plant a garden. He had been working extra hours at the livery to save money for furniture, and the house was sparsely appointed, but Violet did not care. It was theirs, a place they would build a life together. Their wedding night was tender and sweet. Owen was gentle with Violet, mindful of her inexperience, taking his time to make sure she was comfortable. There was passion, too, the powerful need that had been building between them for months finally unleashed, but always tempered by his care for her. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, and Violet felt a contentment she had never known was possible. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Owen replied, pulling her closer. "More than I knew I could love anyone." The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Owen was used to living alone, to silence and solitude, and now he had a wife who filled the house with her presence. But he found he loved the change. He loved coming home from the livery to find Violet cooking supper. He loved the sound of her humming as she knitted in the evenings. He loved the simple domesticity of sharing a life with someone. Violet, too, found joy in marriage. She had been afraid that giving herself to a husband would mean losing her independence, but Owen never tried to control her. She continued her work knitting socks for those who needed them, and Owen supported it completely, even building her a special chair with good light for her knitting. She managed their small household, but Owen helped with the chores, never expecting her to do everything alone. They were partners in the truest sense, each contributing to their shared life, and the physical side of marriage was a revelation to Violet. She had been nervous about it at first, but Owen made her feel cherished and desired in equal measure. His strength, which could have been intimidating, was always leashed in their bedroom, used only to lift her and hold her and make her feel utterly safe. And there was passion, too, a heat between them that left them both breathless and satisfied. As summer turned to fall, Violet realized she was pregnant. She told Owen one evening as he was washing up after work, and he went very still, soap dripping from his hands. "A baby," he said hoarsely. "Yes," Violet confirmed, placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "The doctor confirmed it today. He thinks it will come in late March or early April." Owen crossed to her in 2 long strides and dropped to his knees in front of her, wrapping his arms carefully around her waist and pressing his face to her belly. Violet ran her fingers through his hair, now shorter than when she had first met him but still long enough to curl at the ends, and felt tears prick her eyes at his obvious emotion. "Thank you," Owen said, his voice muffled against her. "Thank you for this gift." "We made it together," Violet reminded him gently. Owen looked up at her and his eyes were wet. "I never thought I would have this, a wife, a child, a family. I thought I was meant to be alone." "You are not alone anymore," Violet said firmly. "You will never be alone again." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Violet continued knitting, though she tired more easily now. Owen was endlessly solicitous, bringing her water and cushions and anything else she needed. He rubbed her feet when they swelled. He held her hair when she was sick in the mornings. He read aloud to her in the evenings, adventure stories and poetry, his deep voice filling their small house with warmth. As Violet's belly grew, Owen became even more protective. He walked her everywhere, his hand always at her elbow or the small of her back. He forbade her from carrying anything heavy. He worried constantly that she was not eating enough or resting enough or staying warm enough. It would have been smothering, except that Violet could see it came from a place of deep love and a fear of losing what he had finally found. "I am not fragile," she told him one evening when he tried to stop her from picking up a basket of laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "You are my woman," Owen said stubbornly, "and I will take care of you. You can take care of me without treating me like I might break," Violet pointed out, but she was smiling. Owen sighed and pulled her into his arms, which was becoming more difficult as her belly expanded. "I am sorry. I know I am being overbearing. I just worry." "I know," Violet said, softening. "But I am healthy and the baby is healthy. Everything will be fine." Winter in Hot Springs was cold but not brutal, nothing like the winters Owen had endured in his mountain cabin. They kept a fire going in the hearth, and Owen made sure they had plenty of wood stocked. He also built a cradle for the baby, working in the evenings by lamplight, sanding the wood until it was smooth as silk and carving small animals into the headboard. A bear, a deer, an eagle. Christmas came and they celebrated quietly, just the two of them. Owen gave Violet a beautiful shawl he had special ordered from Santa Fe, made of the softest wool in a deep green that matched her eyes. Violet gave Owen a new shirt she had sewn herself, fitted to his broad shoulders and strong arms. They went to midnight mass, standing together in the church with the other townspeople, and Violet felt a profound sense of belonging. As March approached, Violet grew more uncomfortable. The baby was large and active, kicking at all hours. She could not sleep well, could not find a comfortable position. Owen did his best to help, but there was little he could do except be there, and sometimes Violet snapped at him in her discomfort, then immediately apologized. "You have nothing to apologize for," Owen always said. "You are growing our child. You can be as irritable as you want." The baby came on a warm evening in early April, 3 days after Easter. Violet's water broke while she was preparing supper, and Owen went pale but immediately swung into action. He sent for the midwife, Mrs. Chen, who was Mr. Chen's daughter-in-law and the most experienced birthing woman in Hot Springs. He helped Violet to the bedroom, got her settled, and held her hand through the first contractions, which were more painful than anything Violet had ever experienced. Mrs. Patterson arrived shortly after Mrs. Chen, insisting that she needed to be there to help. She bustled around making tea and gathering linens while Mrs. Chen examined Violet and pronounced everything normal. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Owen never left Violet's side, letting her squeeze his hands until she thought she might break his fingers, wiping her face with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement. He looked haggard and terrified, but he stayed strong for her. Finally, as the sun rose fully over the mountains, Violet gave one last push and felt the baby slide free. The cry that filled the room was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "A son," Mrs. Chen announced, wrapping the baby and placing him in Violet's arms. "A healthy, strong son." Violet looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. Then she looked at Owen, who was staring at the baby with an expression of complete awe. "You want to hold him?" she asked softly. Owen nodded wordlessly, and Violet carefully passed their son to him. The baby looked impossibly small in Owen's large hands, but Owen held him with exquisite gentleness, his expression transforming into something Violet could only describe as wonder. "Hello, little one," Owen said quietly. I am your papa, and I promise I will always protect you and your mama. You are everything." Violet felt tears stream down her face, exhausted and overwhelmed and happier than she had ever been. "What should we name him?" she asked. Owen looked at her. "I was thinking Oliver, after my father." "If that is all right with you." "Oliver Rutherford," Violet said, testing it out. "I like it." "Oliver Hayes Rutherford," Owen corrected. "He should have your name too." And so Oliver Hayes Rutherford came into the world, and his parents loved him with a fierce devotion that surprised even them in its intensity. The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting. Oliver was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he needed constant care. Violet was recovering from the birth, tired and sore, and Owen did everything he could to help. He changed nappies and walked the floor with Oliver when he cried at night. He brought Violet food and water while she nursed. He took over all the household chores without complaint. Mrs. Patterson came by daily with meals and advice. The townspeople brought gifts, blankets and clothes and toys carved from wood. Even the Apache woman who sometimes came to trade in town stopped by with a beautiful cradle board and herbs that she said would help Violet heal. As spring turned to summer, they settled into a rhythm. Owen worked at the livery during the day while Violet cared for Oliver and kept the house. In the evenings, they were a family, sitting together as the light faded, taking turns holding their son. Violet knitted while Oliver slept, making tiny socks for his growing feet, and Owen read aloud or carved wood, creating a growing menagerie of animals for Oliver to play with when he was older. One evening, when Oliver was nearly 3 months old, Violet and Owen sat on the porch watching the sunset. Oliver was asleep against Owen's chest, his tiny fist curled against his father's shirt. Violet was knitting a new pair of socks for a rancher's daughter, her needles clicking in the quiet. "Do you ever miss it?" Violet asked softly. "The mountains, the solitude." Owen was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, but I do not miss being alone." "This," he gestured to encompass their house, their baby, her, "this is everything I needed and did not know how to ask for." "I am glad you asked for socks," Violet said with a smile. Owen laughed, a deep rumble that made Oliver stir against him. "Best lie I ever told." "It was not a lie." "You did need socks." "I needed you," Owen corrected. "The socks were just an excuse to keep you." Violet set down her knitting and leaned against her husband's shoulder, careful not to disturb their sleeping son. "You have me," she said, "for the rest of our lives. Promise." Owen asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Promise," Violet confirmed. They sat there as darkness fell, a family bound by love and choice and the simple act of a mountain man asking for socks so he could stay near the woman who had captured his heart. The years passed with the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. Oliver grew from a baby into a toddler, then a boy, sturdy and strong like his father but with his mother's thoughtful nature. He learned to walk holding onto his father's large hands, and he learned to count by helping his mother with her knitting. The townspeople adored him, this child of the mountain man and the sock woman, and he was often found playing with the other children in town or helping his father at the livery. When Oliver was 3, Violet became pregnant again. This time, she was less nervous, knowing what to expect. Owen was no less protective, but he had learned from the first time to give her space when she needed it. The second baby came in the fall, a daughter they named Iris, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's honey-colored hair. Owen wept when he held her for the first time, this tiny girl who had him wrapped around her finger from the first moment. Life in Hot Springs was good. Owen had worked his way up to managing the livery stable, and they had a steady income. Violet continued her knitting, though now she was more selective about when and how much she did. Her children came first, but the townspeople understood. She still made socks for those who truly needed them, but she also knitted for pleasure now, making beautiful sweaters and blankets and scarves for her family. The house that had seemed adequate when they married now felt cramped with 2 children, so Owen began building an addition. He worked on it in the evenings and on Sundays, with help from some of the men in town. Mr. Chen contributed his carpentry skills, and the banker, Mr. Wilson, helped with the financing. By the time Iris was 1, they had 2 more bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and a real parlor where Violet could sit and knit while watching her children play. Owen and Violet's love deepened with time rather than fading. They had grown together, learned each other's rhythms, become partners in every sense of the word. They still looked at each other with desire, even after years of marriage, and they made time for intimacy even as their lives grew busier with children and work and community responsibilities. When Oliver was 7 and Iris was 4, a man came to town asking questions about Violet. He was a private investigator from Kansas, hired by Violet's father to find her. The man was not threatening, just determined, and he eventually tracked her to the boarding house where Mrs. Patterson still lived. Mrs. Patterson, loyal to the end, sent word to Violet immediately. Violet felt her heart sink, all the old fear rushing back. She had not spoken to her father in 6 years, not since she had run away from the man he wanted her to marry. She had thought she was safe, that enough time had passed that no one would be looking for her. Owen found her sitting in their bedroom, trembling. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately, kneeling in front of her. Violet told him about the investigator, about her father, about the fear that maybe she would be forced to go back to Kansas. Owen listened, his face growing hard. "No one is taking you anywhere," he said flatly. "You are my wife. This is your home. If your father wants to talk to you, he can write a letter like a civilized person. But you do not have to go back, and you do not have to see anyone you do not want to see." "What if he causes trouble?" Violet asked. "Then I will handle it," Owen said, and there was steel in his voice that reminded Violet that he had spent 15 years surviving in the wilderness. He was gentle with those he loved, but he was still fundamentally a man who could be dangerous when necessary. The investigator came to their house the next day. Owen answered the door, and his sheer size made the man take a step back. "I am looking for a woman named Violet Hayes," the investigator said. "I was told she might be here." "My wife's name is Violet Rutherford," Owen said coldly. "And what business do you have with her? Her father hired me to find her. He wants to know that she is safe." "She is safe. You can report back that she is married, has children, and is very happy. Now leave." "Sir, I really need to speak with her directly." "Her father is willing to pay a substantial sum for information about her whereabouts." "My wife does not need your money or her father's, and you have your information. She is alive and well. Now get off my property before I make you leave." The investigator, seeing the look in Owen's eyes, wisely chose to go. But he left a letter which Owen brought to Violet. She opened it with shaking hands. It was from her father, written in his familiar handwriting. In it, he apologized for trying to force her into a marriage she did not want. He explained that the man she had been engaged to had shown his true colors after she left, getting into trouble with the law and eventually being arrested for assault. Her father said he should have listened to her, should have trusted her judgment, and he was sorry. He was not asking her to come home, he wrote, only wanted to know that she was safe and perhaps to have some contact with her if she was willing. Violet cried as she read it, years of hurt and anger and grief pouring out. Owen held her until she was done, then asked, "What do you want to do?" "I want to write him back," Violet said slowly. "I want to tell him about you and Oliver and Iris. I want him to know that I am happy, but I do not want to go back to Kansas." "Then write to him," Owen said, "on your terms." So Violet wrote a letter, telling her father about her life in Hot Springs. She described Owen, her mountain man who had asked for socks and stolen her heart. She described her children, her work, her friends. She told him she had forgiven him, but that New Mexico was her home now. She included a photograph they had taken the previous year at the traveling photographer's studio, showing Owen standing tall and strong behind her chair, Violet seated with Iris in her lap, and Oliver standing beside his father with his hand on Owen's arm. Her father wrote back with joy and relief, saying how proud he was of the life she had built. Over the following years, they maintained a correspondence, and eventually, Violet's father even came to visit, making the long journey from Kansas. He met Owen, shook his hand, and thanked him for taking care of his daughter. He played with his grandchildren and told them stories about their mother as a little girl. And when he left, he told Violet that he could die happy knowing she was loved and safe. As Oliver and Iris grew, they became the heart of Violet and Owen's world. Oliver had his father's strength and his mother's kindness, and by the time he was 12, he was already helping at the livery, learning the business from his father. Iris was bright and curious, always asking questions, and she loved to sit with her mother and learn to knit, her small hands mastering the needles with surprising speed. The years were not without challenges. There was the drought of 1891 that tested every farmer and rancher in the region. There was the influenza outbreak of 1893 that took several townspeople, though thankfully spared the Rutherford family. There were the normal trials of raising children and maintaining a household and dealing with the 100 small difficulties that make up a life. But through it all, Owen and Violet stood together. They had built something solid, something that could weather storms both literal and metaphorical. Their love, which had started with a simple request for socks, had grown into something deeper and richer than either of them could have imagined. One evening, when Oliver was 15 and Iris was 12, the family sat together on their porch watching the sunset. It had become a tradition over the years, this gathering at the end of the day, a time to be together and share the events of their lives. "Papa," Iris asked, "tell us again how you met Mama." Owen smiled, glancing at Violet, who rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "You have heard this story 100 times, but I like it," Iris insisted. "Your father saw me knitting socks outside the general store," Violet said, taking up the tale. "And he asked me to make him a pair. But he already had good socks," Oliver chimed in. "He told us that part." "He did," Violet agreed, reaching over to take Owen's hand. "He asked for socks just to keep me talking to him." "Best decision I ever made," Owen said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it. Iris sighed dramatically. "That is so romantic." "It was practical," Owen said, but he was smiling. "I needed a reason to stay in town. Socks were as good a reason as any." "You stayed because you loved her," Iris said with the certainty of youth. "I stayed because I thought I could love her," Owen corrected gently. "I was already halfway there before I even spoke to her, but I did not know if she would give me a chance, so I made up an excuse to keep seeing her." "And it worked," Oliver observed. "It worked," Owen agreed. "Though I had to be very patient. Your mother made me wait quite a while before she agreed to marry me." "6 weeks is not that long," Violet protested. "It felt like forever," Owen said, and there was still such warmth in his eyes when he looked at her that Violet felt her heart flutter the way it had when she was 22. "You think I will find someone like that?" Iris asked wistfully. "Someday," Violet assured her, "when you are older." "There is no rush." "But how will I know?" Iris pressed. Owen spoke before Violet could. "You will know because they will see you, not the version of you that you think you should be, but the real you, and they will love you for it. That is what your mother did for me." She saw a mountain man who spent too much time alone and decided I was worth her time anyway. "You sold yourself short," Violet said softly. "You were always worth it." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. This was their life, these quiet moments of connection, these shared sunsets and stories told and retold until they became part of the family mythology. As the children grew older and eventually began to build their own lives, Owen and Violet found themselves with more time together. Oliver apprenticed with a blacksmith in a nearby town, showing a talent for metalwork that surprised everyone. Iris, brilliant and ambitious, caught the eye of the new schoolteacher and began studying to become a teacher herself. When the house grew quiet again, just the two of them as it had been in the beginning, Owen and Violet rediscovered each other. They took long walks in the evenings, just as they had when they were courting. They sat on the porch and watched the stars, Owen pointing out constellations and telling her the Apache names for them that he had learned years ago in the mountains. They made love with the passion of newlyweds and the comfort of old partners, and they talked about everything and nothing, secure in the knowledge that they had built something lasting. One day, when Violet was 45 and Owen was 50, they were sorting through some old boxes in the attic and Violet found the first pair of socks she had made for Owen, carefully wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "You kept these?" she asked, surprised. Owen looked over from where he was moving a trunk. "Of course I kept them. They are the reason I have everything I have now." "They are just socks," Violet said, though she was smiling. "They are not just socks," Owen said seriously. "They are the excuse I used to stay near you. They are the reason you agreed to keep talking to me. They are the beginning of our story." Violet unwrapped the socks carefully. They were beautifully made, some of her finest work, thick and soft and still in perfect condition despite being nearly 20 years old. "I have never worn them," Owen admitted. "I could not bring myself to. They were too important." "That is ridiculous," Violet said, but she was touched. "They were meant to be worn." "Then I will wear them tomorrow," Owen said, "if you insist," but they both knew he would not. Those socks were a symbol, a tangible reminder of the moment their lives had changed, and some things were too precious to be used in ordinary ways. As they moved into their 50s, and then their 60s, Owen and Violet watched their children grow into adults and start families of their own. Oliver married a kind woman named Sarah, and they had 3 children. Iris became a teacher as she had planned and married a lawyer from Santa Fe, and they had 2 children. The Rutherford family grew and flourished, spreading roots throughout New Mexico territory and beyond. Owen eventually retired from the livery, though he continued to help out when they needed him. He was still strong even in his 60s, still capable of the hard work he had done all his life, though Violet noticed he tired more easily now. She herself had slowed down, her hands sometimes stiff from decades of knitting, but she still made socks for her grandchildren and anyone else who needed them. They spent their days together, these 2 people who had found each other against all odds. They gardened and cooked and maintained their house. They visited with their children and grandchildren. They attended church and community events. They lived the quiet, satisfying life of people who had worked hard and loved well and had no regrets. One evening, when Owen was 68 and Violet was 65, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Owen's hair was now more gray than brown, and Violet's honey-colored locks had faded to silver, but the way they looked at each other had not changed. "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been?" Violet asked, her hand in Owen's. If Joshua had not told you that story about me knitting socks, if you had not come to Hot Springs all the time, Owen admitted. I think about how I would still be alone in that cabin, carving wood by firelight and wondering why it felt so empty. I think about how close I came to missing this, to missing you. I would have been all right, Violet said. I had a life here. I was happy enough. Happy enough is not the same as happy, Owen said. I want you to be happy. I want to be the reason you are happy. You are, Violet assured him. You always have been. They sat in silence, holding hands, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. A cool breeze brought the scent of sage and pine, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. I love you, Owen said, as he had said thousands of times over their decades together. I love you too, Violet replied, as she always did. And as the night deepened around them, they remained there, two souls perfectly matched, a mountain man and the woman he had asked for socks, together in the life they had built from courage and hope and love. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that mark any long life. There were more grandchildren, and then great-grandchildren, the Rutherford name spreading and taking root throughout the territory. There were losses, too, as Mrs. Patterson passed away at the age of 92, and Mr. Chen followed her a year later. Father Miguel retired and was replaced by a younger priest, though Owen and Violet still remembered the old man fondly. Through it all, Owen and Violet remained each other's constant. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 40th, then their 45th. By then, they were among the oldest couples in Hot Springs, and the younger generation looked at them with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. How had they stayed in love for so long? What was their secret? When asked, Owen always said the same thing. I chose her every day and she chose me. That is the secret, Violet would add, and we built a life based on respect and partnership. We were always on the same side. It was simple wisdom, but profound in its truth. When Owen was 73, his health began to decline. He had lived a hard life in his youth, and those years in the mountains had taken their toll on his body. His joints ached in the morning, and he tired easily. But he never complained, and he still walked with Violet every evening, even if they did not go as far as they once had. Violet watched her husband grow older with a bittersweet mix of love and sorrow. She knew that their time was limited now, that the years they had left together were precious and finite. So she made the most of every day, treasuring each moment, each conversation, each touch of his hand. One spring evening, when the air was warm and the first flowers were blooming in their garden, Owen and Violet sat on their porch as they had done for decades. Owen was tired, more so than usual, but he insisted on their evening ritual. You remember the day we met? He asked, his voice softer now than it had been in his youth but still steady. Of course, Violet said. You walked up to me outside the general store, tall and broad and intimidating, and asked me to make you socks. I was terrified, Owen admitted. I thought you would say no. I never would have said no, Violet said. Even then, before I knew you, there was something about you, something that drew me in. I loved you from that first moment, Owen said. I know people say that is impossible, but it is true. I looked at you sitting there with your knitting needles and your basket of socks, and I knew, this is her, this is the one I have been waiting for. Violet felt tears prick her eyes. I was afraid of you at first. Not because you were frightening, but because I was afraid to feel anything for any man after what I had been through. But you were so patient with me. You gave me space and time and never pressured me. You were worth waiting for, Owen said simply. They sat in silence for a while, holding hands as the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant colors. Then Owen said quietly, I want you to know something, Violet, in case I do not get another chance to say it. You gave me everything. A home, a family, a purpose. You took a lonely man who lived in the wilderness and gave him a reason to be part of the world. I have never regretted a single day with you. Owen, Violet said, her voice breaking. You are not saying goodbye, are you? No, Owen assured her. I am just saying thank you for choosing me. For making me socks all those years ago, even though I did not really need them. For giving me a life beyond anything I dreamed possible. Violet leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the sunset together. Two people who had found each other through the simple act of kindness and built a love that had lasted a lifetime. Owen lived for 5 more years, defying the doctor's predictions and staying strong through sheer will and the love of his family. He saw his great-grandchildren born and held them in his arms. He celebrated his 50th wedding anniversary with Violet, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them testament to the love he and Violet had shared. When he finally passed, it was peacefully in his sleep, with Violet beside him holding his hand. He was 78 years old, and he died as he had lived, surrounded by love. The funeral was attended by what seemed like everyone in Hot Springs and beyond. Owen had been a quiet man, not given to grand gestures or public displays, but he had touched many lives through his steady kindness and his obvious devotion to his family. The priest spoke of a life well lived, of a man who had loved completely and worked hard and left the world better than he found it. Violet mourned deeply, as was natural after 50 years with the man she loved. But she did not fall apart. She had Owen's strength in her, the resilience he had shown throughout his life, and she drew on it now. She was surrounded by family, by children and grandchildren who had learned from Owen and Violet what true love looked like, and they supported her through her grief. One day, several months after Owen's death, Violet was going through his things when she found a wooden box she had never seen before. Inside were the dozens of small figures he had carved over the years, the animals he had made first for her, then for their children, then for their grandchildren. Bears and deer and eagles and horses, each one perfectly detailed, each one made with love during quiet evenings by lamplight. Beneath the carvings was a letter written in Owen's careful hand. It was addressed to her, and with trembling fingers Violet opened it. "My dearest Violet," it began. "If you are reading this, then I have gone ahead of you to whatever comes next. I hope you are not too sad. I hope you remember the good times more than the hard ones. I hope you know how much you were loved. I want you to know that you made my life complete. Before you, I was half a person, surviving but not really living. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to be better than I was. You gave me a family, children and grandchildren who carry on our love into the future. You gave me a home, not just a place to live, but a true home filled with warmth and laughter and belonging. I am grateful for every day we had together. Every sunrise we watched, every sunset, every quiet evening on the porch, every meal we shared, every conversation, every moment of intimacy. I would not trade a single second of our life together for anything in the world. I know you will grieve as I would grieve for you. But do not grieve too long, my love. Live the rest of your life fully. Spend time with our children. Knit socks for anyone who needs them, as you always have. Find joy in the small things. And know that I am with you always in your heart, in your memories, in the legacy we built together. Thank you for making me socks all those years ago, even though we both knew I did not really need them. Thank you for seeing past the rough mountain man exterior to the lonely soul underneath. Thank you for taking a chance on me, for marrying me, for building this beautiful life with me. I love you now and forever, Owen." Violet held the letter to her chest and wept, but they were not entirely tears of sorrow. There was gratitude, too, and love, and a deep sense of peace. Owen had given her everything, and she had given it back to him in full measure. They had built something beautiful together, something that would last long after they were both gone. Violet lived for 12 more years, surrounded by the family she and Owen had created. She continued knitting socks for those who needed them, just as she always had. And the children of Hot Springs grew up knowing that Mrs. Rutherford would always make them warm socks if their families could not afford them. She became a beloved figure in town, a grandmother to everyone, a living example of kindness and generosity. When she finally passed away peacefully at the age of 87, she was buried next to Owen in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Hot Springs. Their children arranged for a special headstone, simple but beautiful with both their names and the words. He asked for socks. She gave him her heart. Together they built a life of love. The story of Owen and Violet became part of Hot Springs folklore, told and retold to each new generation. The tale of the mountain man who saw a woman knitting socks for strangers and asked her to make him a pair just to keep her near became a legend of true love. A reminder that sometimes the most profound connections begin with the simplest gestures. Their house remained in the family, passing down through the generations, and it was said that on quiet evenings you could still feel the love that had filled it. The presence of two souls who had found each other across the wilderness and built something lasting from courage and hope, and a simple pair of hand-knitted socks. And in Hot Springs, New Mexico, there remained a tradition that whenever someone was struggling or lonely or lost, the townspeople would knit them a pair of socks in honor of Violet and Owen Rutherford and the love story that had transformed them both.